Anyway, back to this evening. What have we got coming up? Loads to come, comedy later, but right now, the first of this year's live performances. Last year, Sara Sheridan was invited into that very archive, the Alistair Gray archive, as part of the Creative Commission series. This was with Rog Glass and Creative Writing at the University of Strathclyde. And this was on a mission to explore making a new work inspired by the collection. Sara, briefly, is an award-winning activist and writer. She digs really, really deep, fascinating storytelling and little facts of history, details, and very much always focusing on forgotten and women's voices as often as not. The Fair Botanists won the Waterstones Scottish Book of the Year a little while back. The amazing Where Are the Women, if you haven't got hold of that, is an absolute must-read. It basically remaps the country with women's voices and faces and stories and tales. And then there's the wonderful Secrets of Blythswood Square, historical mystery. I think Sara and I, after her reading, might chat about that a little bit, not too much, but it's on sale up there at that wonderful shop. Loads of stuff on sale. Anyway, for this, Sara has created a brand new short story. It's called Found, and it explores Alistair's mural artworks. Of course, there's loads of them throughout the city, and also the enduring legacy that they have had on Glasgow's landscape and history. This is an excerpt of it, has to be said. You can get the full thing online. There is going to be a QR code, I think, because we're very tech savvy, aren't we? There's going to be a QR code later, so you can access the whole thing, and it's Sara reading it in Alistair's chair, no less. But for now, let us hear an excerpt, and let us hear, for the utterly, utterly wonderful reading an excerpt from Found, Sara Sheridan.
I'm always the shortest one that comes up onto the stage. So I spend a lot of time in archives. I am the SWAT content this evening. And the reason that I hang out in archives, that archives for me are magical places, is this. Sometimes you call up a dusty old box of documents and you're reading them, and let's be clear, a lot of content in most archives is quite boring. Not the Alistair Gray archive, obviously. But often as a novelist, you're in there and you're fishing for content. And then suddenly you open a journal or a letter, and it might be something that nobody else has read for 100 or 200 or 300 years. And suddenly the person writing it is standing next to you and they're telling you about their life. That they just saw an elephant, or their friend died, or that they miss home. You're inside their head. And that's magic, because archives are the raw material that's left of where we come from. Not only personally where we come from, but culturally and socially and politically. And I always say, you can't understand where you are until you understand where you come from. And you can't decide where you want to go until you know both of these things. And that's why archives are really important. And the Alistair Gray archive is unusual because it's been organised so soon after Alistair's death. For many people involved in the archive, Alistair's within living memory, for many of you tonight too. We met him, and to different degrees we knew him. Some people knew him very well. I sometimes feel when I go there, it's like Alistair Anonymous, and you turn up and you're like, hi, my name is Sara, and I met Alistair 4 times. Like, it's an admission. And I did meet him a few times, by the way. He was so eccentric, and I guess I connected with that because I'm probably quite eccentric too. The common understanding is that folk fall into 2 categories. You're either creative or you're non-creative. But my view is that more important to your life and to your work, actually, is a different distinction. Are you a conformist or are you a non-conformist? Or more accurately, to what extent are you conformist or non-conformist? Because like all the important things, it's a rainbow. So for writers and artists and musicians and actors, and I know a lot of writers and artists and musicians and actors, that means, for example, do you conform to a genre, or do prizes and awards matter to you? To what extent and in what way do you challenge the cultural or societal norms of your day? How diverse is your oeuvre? As a SWAT, I find the non-conformists most interesting in the archive, and also the way that over time, often non-conformists are subsumed into mainstream culture, the way it changes. And the example I give of this is Jane Austen. Jane Austen, conformist, right? Absolutely not. Austen really pissed people off with Mansfield Park, which she was searing about her anti-establishment beliefs. She used the names of all the major slaveholders for the baddies. She didn't get married, and she kicked off about that properly, like what it did to her life. Jane Austen was a non-conformist in her era, and today we have forgotten that. She's been subsumed into frocks and manners and some kind of neutered pre-feminist lexicon, and Colin Firth coming out of a lake wet and looking honestly quite hot. The Alistair Gray archive will ensure, I have no doubt, that this doesn't happen to Alistair's legacy. He was the preeminent writer and artist in Scotland in his time. He has a distinctive voice, a visual voice, and a narrative voice. He is important. His observations of the Glasgow and the Scotland that he came from are important too. They tell us about where we are, and I am confident that they will continue to do that. Excuse me. So when I was asked to write something for the archive, a creative commission, I decided to write a short story. Now, for novelists, short stories are fun. Backstage at book festivals, writers who only write short stories or kids' books or whatever say that it's just as difficult as writing a novel. As a novelist who's also written short stories and kids' books for that matter, I can tell you that's complete rubbish. It isn't true. Short stories for me are fun. It's all over quickly. And I decided I wanted to write a short story about a fictional Alistair Gray mural, a lost erotic mural of naked women. Alistair wrote women really, really well. Bella Baxter's, for me, his best female character. I loved her long before she looked like Emma Stone. She immediately felt to me like a late 19th, early 20th century Scottish woman, someone upper middle class who was going to do what she wanted to do, like Elsie Ingalls or Sophia Jex Blake. I wanted to recognize that character finesse, the way that women were in his stories when I was writing, but also how Alistair painted and drew the female form. Alistair's murals were often based on the Book of Genesis. You can see above us the Garden of Eden. So I wanted to write naked women. And the mural in the story is lost because Alistair's work wasn't appreciated enough in his early career, in part because he was so non-conformist. So for that reason, in real life, there are lost works because people who bought or commissioned his work didn't conserve it. And that's why I called the short story Found. So I'm going to read you now from the story I wrote, which turned out to be quite long, too long to read all the way through because I'm a novelist, though we do have this recording of me doing it later. If you fancy a bedtime story, it'll be on the Archive's YouTube channel, and they're also going to put up a link. I don't know if it's not behind me yet. The story's narrator is an older woman. She's 70, and she's a textile conservator, and she comes to Glasgow from London on a short-term contract and discovers in the flat she's rented that there's this little tear in the wallpaper. So here we go. The peachy light cut a slice into the room, highlighting a join in the thick ochre wallpaper, which was peeling only a fraction. I could just make out something behind it, something odd. I stood in a chair and worried that I was going mad, like the protagonist of Charlotte Perkin Gilman's famous horror story, a woman trapped behind yellow wallpaper, picking it away. Cautiously, I stripped the curled edge, revealing, I hesitate to tell you, a human bottom. An arse, a bum that is, figuratively drawn. Goodness, I said, and jumped down, backing away. The arse hovered overhead for some days. I ate my cereal in the morning, glancing at it. I tried to turn away at night, but it proved impossible to ignore. And eventually, I found a stepladder in a cupboard and climbed up to perform an examination. Carefully, easing the paper to one side with a kitchen knife, revealed the arse, though muscular, belonged to a woman's body, lounging lengthways just beneath the cornice. She was glancing over her shoulder, long hair down her back, and a label beside her that said, Inga. The paper pulled away easily, as I slowly made my way down the wall to reveal a sprawling landscape, including more women, some naked, some clothed, all named on little scrolls beside them. Eve, Lilith, Mrs. Cromer, the cleaner. Claire Ramsey, primary school teacher. Bella Baxter, Liz Lockhead, a mother cradling a babe in arms entitled Downhill, Madonna and Child. Margot MacDonald, politician. Mary, Queen of Scots. The construction nodded to a bucolic Renaissance painting with goddesses lounging under trees. I worried that I'd uncovered a stalker's wall of obsession, an artist stalker with a good eye, influenced, I'd say, by William Blake. There were strips of the mural still hidden, where I'd need to soak the paper to get it off, but already the image was impressive. I sat on the floor like an errant puppy amid a pile of tattered paper strips. Then I worried that the landlord would be furious and I'd get into trouble at the museum. Oh God, I whispered, what have I done? Now, when it came to writing this piece, it was important to me that as well as his art, that Alistair's voice was in the story too. The people we knew in life, whether we knew them personally or because they were important people to us, politicians or writers or commentators, when they die, we can still hear their voices, hopefully not literally, just what they thought. So Alistair Gray is in the story too. He's a tramp, or at least the narrator at first thinks he's a tramp. I think it's fair to say that Alistair was not sartorially interested in his appearance. And in the story, he just turns up and he talks to her, and she's from London, so that's like really weird for her. Though here in Glasgow, it's less odd. The best conversations are always random, right? So this is very much part of Celtic culture, and Glasgow is, in my view, Scotland's most Celtic city, not just football, but its west coast. It's very Irish as well as Scottish. I moved to Glasgow myself a couple of years ago. I can say it to you. It's by almost every measure Scotland's best city. I just can't say that at the Edinburgh Festival. So here's a slightly surreal flash of Alistair from the story, and he actually encourages Marianne, the narrator, to uncover his mural, and then he wants her to make changes to it. Alistair used to really do this. He was always reworking things, and that was how he worked, by reworking or editing, I guess. And I identify with this strongly. I just rewrote a whole novel that was already published and that had been shortlisted for an award, but I had learned some new stuff, and I had developed, I guess, and it went out of print, and I managed to talk the publisher into a new edition, and I improved the text for that edition, which is out next month. Hurrah. So here's Alistair. He's beyond the grave, and he's still tinkering with his work, and he wants Marianne to change his mural, and this is Marianne telling us about it. I pulled on a coat and I took my cigarette on a walk round the block. The tramp had gone from the Botanic gates. I turned back towards the tenement and ground out my cigarette on the pavement with my heel. Just then a taxi wheeled past. In slow motion, it seemed. The window opened, and from inside, the tramp waved. "You've got it then. Those squirrels need a touch-up," he shouted, leaning part of the way out. "At least half of it should be a night scene. Stars," he waved. And the taxi receded, not slowing one iota. I walked into the middle of the now deserted road and watched the red light of the brakes glow as the vehicle turned left. I shouted, "Who the hell are you?" High above, a late-night light clicked on in someone's bedroom. I skulked guiltily back inside the hallway before anyone could catch me, shamefully shouting in the street like a drunk student. Upstairs, I flicked on the big light and I looked at the squirrels. He was right, of course. Conservation was required, and standing back, if half the composition was against a dark backdrop with stars, it would make it more iconic. Oh God, I thought, he wants me to finish it. No spoilers, but in the story, Alistair doesn't stop there. So the story's called Found, and it mixes this kind of fact and fiction. A fictional story that is basically a convincing lie. You have to bring the reader into your world. They have to believe what you're saying, and here's the rub. They have to believe what you're saying even though you know it's fiction, and they know it's fiction. They know it's not true. and that this is possible in the human brain, and in fact a really enjoyable way to spend your time, is kind of wild. But story is my greatest pleasure, and if you're here, it's likely you're the same. I was programmed this one time with one of the Doctor Who writers, Ben Aronovich, and we were in London, and we did this big event in a bookshop, and he has a series about a magical police force. And essentially, he says he gets mail from readers saying his magical content would never work because he's got his magical principles wrong. And I thought, wow, that's a win. I mean, magical police force, right? So I'm actually only trying to convince my readers that they're reading something from actual history most of the time, rather than fictionalized, history. Props to Ben Aronovich. And to Alistair, who so often wrote convincingly about worlds that cannot be true, things that cannot have happened. In the story I wrote for this commission, the world Marianne inhabits has to be carefully drawn. She's English, so she's experiencing Scotland for the first time. She's only visited once before for a weekend, and she gets a job, actually, while she's here, writing an academic article about the different kinds of paper that artists use. She's a conservator, so this is within her remit. And the article that she writes is about value. And that's important because Alistair's work has come into some value more recently. His paintings in his first editions are worth much, much more these days. So what denotes value? Ultimately, for me as a writer, value is an interface where the quality of the craft meets the market. Value is a market issue, financial value in a way. And you can extrapolate that out because cultural value is about where the quality of the craft meets people's understanding, often people's understanding of themselves. So ultimately, as a writer, it's about being able to connect with people, to comment on their world in one way or another. And it's about successfully convincing people that what you're saying, your story, has a higher, more important meaning than just a story. And that means it's about impact and also about relevance. So in terms of cultural longevity, it's about being able to do that over time, because some work dates. We've all seen this, right? Enid Blyton, she knows it well. So books we loved as a kid that date, meanings or perceptions of things that change. Something that seems glamorous or interesting that isn't glamorous and interesting outside of its moment. And that's actually another reason why the Alistair Gray Archive is important. It is actively concerned with making that connection between Alistair's work and its relevance today. As I said at the beginning, I spend a lot of time in archives, and the work that Saoirse and her team are doing is extraordinary. They are developing Alistair Gray content for use in Scottish schools, for the curriculum in primary schools. They are connecting the existing creative world of Scotland with Alistair's legacy. That's why I'm here. That's why all the creatives who've been commissioned are here. And the archive is making connections through university students working in history and conservation and creative writing, all the important things. And all this proves the relevance of Alistair's legacy. For we, one of the most important things Alistair ever said, he sort of said it in the film there, was about Glasgow. He said, if you live in Paris or New York or London, you've seen those cities before 1,000 times, you've read about them, you've seen them in paintings and on TV and in cinema, and you know that they are glamorous, complicated places, and you accept that these places have 1,000 stories to tell you. In Glasgow, until pretty recently, and I'd say mostly until even now, the city's poverty in the late 19th and early 20th century is the only story that has generally been allowed to be told. So a friend of mine was over from LA last summer to a wedding in the Highlands, and he phoned me and he said he wanted to catch up. He thought I still lived in Edinburgh. And I said, oh, I've moved to Glasgow, and you should come down for lunch. And he said, Glasgow? And he was really shocked. He said, haven't you read Shuggie Bain? And that's the story that we're allowed to tell about Glasgow. That's all anybody knows. And it's partly a true story. It's not a lie, but there's a lot more to it. Alistair's work challenges that, and actually my work challenges that too. And when I moved here a couple of years ago, we moved into the city centre, and even people within Glasgow were shocked that someone would want to live in the city centre rather than the West End. Glasgow's still scarred very much by the poverty and the slums, and people from here can't believe you'd move back into the city, even though the flats are amazing, I'm just saying. Even though the transport links are great and there are fab restaurants, people from Glasgow are not having it, and they say, like, what about Sauchiehall Street and the bins? So the short story I wrote here isn't the only way I've used Alistair Gray in my work. He kind of inspired a 5-part radio play I wrote last year for BBC Radio 4. It's called Robert Burns, His Psychotherapy and Cure. And in it, Elaine C. Smith plays a long-suffering psychotherapist who's in her office in Glasgow one day when Robert Burns walks in, and she decides effectively he's deluded and she's going to cure him. And that's the story, but the setting is present-day Glasgow, and I wrote the play as a love letter, really, to the city, because I do love it. Gray's Glasgow is nuanced and clever. It's a unique place, and there isn't enough creative work that shows that side of the city. And the play is up on BBC Sounds if you want to hear it. Elaine is amazing. She brought it to life. So when I was in the archive, the most inspirational thing for me was hearing people's memory of him, of Alistair. In other archives, you're lucky to find that at all, and you'd love it. I mean, what Charlotte Bronte thought of Jane Austen, wouldn't that be great if we could get hold of that? So a lot of the observations about Gray in the story that I wrote in come from people who knew him, alongside my own impressions, which were fleeting because I only bumped into him a few times, and he never remembered me from one time to the next. Hey-ho. I was in the hairdresser this morning, and I got chatting to a guy. I was sitting in the waiting area, and it was a guy who knew Alistair Gray. He said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to the R&M tonight to talk about Alistair Gray." And he said, "I used to just live up the road from Alistair Gray." So all of Alistair's still out there. He's not just in the archive. And this guy told me a great story, and it's not written into the speech. I only heard it today, so I'm going to tell you it. He used to work in a bar around here, and it was a cocktail bar. And on the counter, they had these big bowls of oranges and lemons and fruit that they were going to use in the cocktail. And Alistair used to come in and say, "It's fantastic, you're giving away free fruit." That's such a good thing to do. And he'd take loads of the oranges and apples and stuff and just put them in his pocket and leave. I love him so much for that. So anyway, I'm going to finish with another short reading from Found. This is what happens to the mural in the story, and we know to what the archive is doing. And again, it's in the voice of Marianne, the narrator. Before the landlord had the mural removed from the flat, the custodian of the Alistair Gray archive came to see it. She sat for a long time over a cooling mug of tea, just staring. "He never finished," she said wistfully. "He kept working on things over and over." I couldn't help think that perhaps he still was. I watched her take photographs as the mural changed with the sun crossing the sky. "He'd have liked what you'd done," she said. I didn't tell her about the old guy. I don't want to end up in an institution. But I felt like nobody knew Gray's work better than this woman, and it was good she'd given the amendments the thumbs up. As we stood in front of the mural at last, she pronounced, "There are images of people here we didn't know he'd painted." Afterwards, I heard a collector paid a 6-figure sum to have the mural installed in a private gallery. The living room was replastered just before my stuff arrived in a van from London, and that's how I ended up moving 500 miles further north than I expected. In the end, I found Glasgow, and Glasgow found me. And at my age, that's the closest to romance I'm likely to get. Thank you for listening to me talk about Alistair's work and my creative intersection with it, about voice, about value. I'm happy to see so many people here today. I feel like his work is spreading wider and wider. My husband was taught creative writing by Alistair when he was at Glasgow University in the late 1970s. And at that time, Alistair was looked on as a kind of impenetrable genius, I think. But he's not impenetrable. It's just really important. If you haven't been to the archive and you'd like to see it, as Saoirse said earlier, perhaps sit in Alistair's now famous green velvet chair, then you can make an appointment. And I hope you enjoy reading or listening to Found half as much as I enjoyed writing it, which is a very great deal.
The wonderful Sara Sheridan there. How about that story? Is this on? Is this on? I'm not going to sing, don't worry. I seem awful far away from you. I don't want to be over there.
You're too far away.
I want to be beside
I miss
you.
you. I miss you.
I miss you already. I love that. Can I just say, I love the fact that even today, like this very morning, we're still hearing these new tales about Alistair.
I didn't expect this guy to know me. He was just sitting there, and then it just all came out, because people want to tell you about Alistair.
And you know that thing about him having a painterly way, which he absolutely did in his writing? I could even see that. You're telling us a story, I could see the colours. And again, it's just inhabiting Glasgow in this different way. You mentioned, we're just going to have a quick blether, then there will be, I believe, a little interval, then there will be comedy. But you moved to Glasgow a couple of years ago.
Yes.
Well, maybe just touch very briefly on the Secrets of Blythswood Square, because there's something about the way you see the city, and maybe the way you've delved into it, which very much reflects Alistair Gray's endless curiosity, but also found in the Secrets of Blythswood Square also both share another common theme, which is hidden erotica.
Yeah. So one of the secrets of Blythswood Square is a hidden erotic cupboard with a huge erotic collection that a very straight-laced, wee-free heiress gets hold of. And she discovers this cupboard, and she just doesn't know how to get rid of this art. Like, she's horrified, and she finds that she has to, delve into this world in Glasgow that she's never been in before, and find people who can help her, because she obviously can't ask the minister, which is where she'd normally go for advice. So it was really good. It was really interesting to write Glasgow as well as a city that was defined by religion, because it's a cathedral city, and a city that was really bougie. Because this book's set in 1846, and Glasgow's really wealthy. There are a lot of people, there's a lot of inventors and people who are enthusiastic. They're just about to dredge the Clyde. And so delving into that Glasgow, which I hadn't known so much about because it isn't really talked about so much, and doing the research for that was really exciting.
But I also love the fact that you touched on within your story and your chat there how well you feel, and I think many of us believe this, Alistair wrote female characters, because you have spent so much of your life and your mind, delving into stories that aren't told. And I mean, also on social media, we can't really call it that thing, but you used to put these brilliant threads on Twitter just revealing all these wonderful stories that
the stories that
away about
told.
Women. So for you, I think, to really feel so convinced by Alistair, it's
listen, it's not every dead man, white guy, creative artist that I would come up and talk about. Like, I would turn it down. But Alistair...
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, Alistair knew. Like, he knew, and he saw people as people. He felt you, and that was it. So I'm really happy to have been involved. Yeah. But I turned stuff down for most of the dead white guys.
I love the fact that also that pub was given of his sustenance. That probably kept Alistair going, that free food for years, actually, didn't it?
Yeah, he probably got extra vitamins.
In his kind of jammy pockets,
yeah,
shirts.
He was in there every day, getting a wee orange.
That's it, apples and oranges. Well, listen, thank you so much. And you can read and you can hear, nonetheless, Sarah's full version of Found. There was a QR code, but you can find it online as well. There it is. Look at that. My head wasn't in the way. Sorry. God almighty, the last thing you need. Anyway, we're going to have a brief break. Saoirse will let me know how long that can be, and then we'll come back. Loads more performances to come. Thank you so much for listening and just for being here. Thanks again to Sara Sheridan. What a woman. Secrets of Blythswood Square is at the shop.